6 months, almost to the day. I know because I checked the date on my phone before I picked up, the way you do when something lands, and you need a second to make sure you're reading it right. 6 months since I'd carried a single box through a lobby I'd walked into every morning for 7 years. 6 months since I'd handed my badge to a receptionist who looked at me like she wasn't sure whether to say congratulations or I'm sorry. The name on my screen was Garrett. I let it ring twice. Not because I needed to think about whether to answer. I knew I was going to answer. I just wanted the 2 seconds. I picked up. I got about half a word out before he was already talking. Fast, easy, the voice he used when he'd already decided how the conversation was going to go and was just waiting for you to catch up. He said my name like we grabbed coffee last week. Asked if I had a minute. Said there was something he thought we should really sit down and discuss, that there was a lot happening at the company right now, and he'd been thinking about me and felt like it was worth a conversation. I leaned back in my chair in my office, the one with the window I'd stopped believing I'd ever have, and I said sure, I had a minute. I didn't tell him I'd been expecting this call. I didn't tell him I'd been expecting it for months. I just said sure and let him keep talking and waited to hear how he was going to frame 4 years of being told, without a single word, that I wasn't quite enough. 4 years in, on a Monday morning, I was sitting at my desk with coffee going cold beside me and a job posting open on my screen. It had gone up internally on Friday. Senior Manager, Operation Strategy. I'd read the description 3 times over the weekend, and then a 4th time that morning because it read like someone had followed me around for a year and written down what I did. The scope, the function, the relationships required. I was already doing the job. The posting was just the title catching up to the reality. Garrett stopped by my desk around 9. He had a way of arriving at your workspace without quite knocking, leaning on the partition, coffee in hand, like he'd just been passing through and something had reminded him of you. He looked at my screen without commenting on it, and then looked at me and said I should throw my name in. It will be a good experience either way, he said. The visibility alone is worth it. And honestly, you're ready. Everyone knows you're ready. I told him I was planning to apply. He nodded like that was the right answer and moved on. I submitted the application that afternoon. I spent 2 evenings before the interview preparing the way I prepared for things that mattered to me, which was thoroughly and probably too seriously. I knew the material cold. I knew what the role needed. I went in and gave them the best version of what I had. 2 weeks later, the all-hands email arrived. The role had been filled. External hire. Someone with a title from a company with a better logo, brought in above the level I'd applied for. I was reading the email when Garrett appeared in the kitchen doorway. He came in and poured himself a coffee and then put his hand on my shoulder in the way he did when he wanted to signal that what he was about to say was personal, not professional. The timing wasn't right, he said. That's not a reflection of you. You know that. Your moment is absolutely coming. I looked at him. I said something like thanks. Something that kept the conversation short without being rude. He gave my shoulder one more small press and left, and I stood in the kitchen with my coffee and the all-hands email still open on my phone. I believed him. That's the honest part. Not completely, not without a small new weight sitting somewhere in my chest, but enough. I'd been at the company 4 years. I knew the work. Garrett had been telling me for most of those 4 years that I was his right hand, the person he relied on, the one who understood the operation better than anyone. I believed that part was true, and I believed that eventually true things got acknowledged. I went back to my desk and opened a new document and kept working. I would hear that sentence, your moment is absolutely coming, 3 more times over the next 3 years. Each time in a different room. Each time with the same hand on my shoulder. Each time after a role that read like my job description had gone to someone who hadn't been there on any of the mornings that built it. How many times do you believe the same sentence before you stop? I made it to 4. The second posting came 11 months later. Same role, reframed slightly. New title, same scope, same level. I saw it go up on a Tuesday morning, and I read it the way I'd read the first one. Carefully, looking for the reason it wasn't me, and I couldn't find one. I applied. Garrett told me he thought this cycle felt different. I went through 4 rounds of interviews over 6 weeks and gave each one everything I had. External hire. Someone from a consulting firm who lasted 14 months before quietly moving on. The third posting appeared 8 months after that. By this point, I understood the ritual well enough that I could feel the shape of it before completed. But Garrett was more deliberate this time. He sat across from me in a one-on-one and told me specifically that he'd been talking to the VP group, that my name had come up positively, that he thought I was in a genuinely strong position. He used the word genuinely. I wrote it down in my notes because I was still the kind of person who took notes on things I wanted to believe. I went through the loop. 5 interviews. A presentation I built over a long weekend. A panel that included 2 VPs who nodded at things I said and asked follow-up questions that felt like progress. External hire. I found out on a Wednesday. By Thursday afternoon, I was more or less functional again. By Friday, I had convinced myself that Garrett was right, that the timing was the problem, that next time would be different, because next time I'd be different. Priya found me in the stairwell between the 4th and 5th floors. She worked on a parallel team, sharp in the specific way of someone who has decided she'd rather be accurate than liked, which in that building made her unusual. We weren't close exactly, but we were the kind of colleagues who told each other the true version of things when it mattered. She pulled the door, closed behind her, and said she needed to tell me something she'd been sitting on for a while. Garrett has been telling the VP group, "You're not quite ready yet," she said. I've heard it twice. 2 different VPs, 2 different conversations. Almost word for word. She looked at me. That's not a coincidence. That's a message someone is sending consistently. I stood there in the stairwell and didn't say anything. I don't know what his reason is, she said, but I wanted you to know what the room sounds like when you're not in it. She went back through the door, and I stood there for another minute with the fluorescent hum of the stairwell and the specific silence of hearing something you'd half known for years finally said out loud. That evening, I opened my laptop and pulled up my resume. 7 years since I'd touched it. I updated it slowly, filling in everything I'd built and run and delivered that had never been formally recognized. It took longer than I expected. Not because I didn't have material, but because I kept stopping to look at the record of what I'd contributed and where it had gone. I didn't send it anywhere. I told myself one more cycle. I told myself I wanted to be sure. I told myself a lot of things that night that were really just one thing. I wasn't ready yet to admit that Garrett had already decided, and that the deciding had nothing to do with me. The question I didn't let myself ask that night was the one that mattered most. Whether Garrett was protecting me from a role I wasn't ready for, or keeping me exactly where he needed me to stay. The 4th posting went up on a Friday afternoon. I saw it at 4:47, which I know because I've been watching for it the way you watch for something you've decided will tell you something definitive. The description had been updated, new language, slightly broader scope, but it was the same role. It had always been the same role. My role, running without the title for 4 years. I didn't apply that weekend. For the first time, I waited until Monday, and before I submitted anything, I sent Garrett a calendar invite for a formal one-on-one. Not a coffee, not a hallway conversation. A meeting on the calendar with a title that said what it was, role discussion, senior manager candidacy. He accepted within the hour. We sat across from each other in one of the small conference rooms, and I asked him directly, not what he thought of my chances, not whether the timing felt right. I asked him specifically, what do I need to do to be considered seriously for this role? Not eventually. This cycle. He didn't hesitate the way I expected him to. He leaned forward and gave me a list like he'd been keeping it somewhere. 3 developmental areas: executive communication, cross-functional influence, and strategic prioritization. 2 stretch projects he thought I should lead to demonstrate expanded scope. And a leadership program run through the company's internal development arm that he said I should really look into. I wrote all of it down, every word. Over the following months, I did each item on the list. I took on both stretch projects and delivered results I documented carefully. I enrolled in the leadership program and finished in the top quarter of my cohort. I requested opportunities to present to the VP group and took them when they came. I kept a running document of every item Garrett had named and what I'd done against it. I told myself this was the version of me they were waiting for. I told myself the list meant something because he'd given it to me in a real room with the door closed. 6 weeks before the expected decision, Garrett sent me a calendar invite. The title said Quick Chat. We sat in the same small conference room. He told me the role had been filled. External candidate, he said. Unique background. He said in the tone of someone describing a weather event. Present tense, already passed, nothing to be done about it. Then he slid to the second part of the conversation, which arrived so smoothly it took me a moment to understand what I was hearing. He wanted to know if I'd be willing to lead the onboarding for the new hire. Get her up to speed on the team, the workflows, the key relationships. He said it with a smile that was meant to feel like a compliment. No one knows this team better than you, he said. Honestly, you be doing her a real service. And its visibility, the VPs will see you in that room. I looked at him across the table. I thought about the list, the stretch projects, the leadership program, the documented delivery against every item he named in that room 4 months earlier. I thought about 4 years of being called his right hand. I thought about what it meant that the most valuable thing I could do, apparently, was teach someone else how to do the job I'd been building. I said I'd think about it. I went back to my desk and opened the document where I'd been tracking everything Garrett asked me to do and everything I delivered. I closed it. I opened my resume instead. This time I sent it somewhere. The new hire's name was Claire. She was polite and capable and genuinely curious about how things worked, and none of that was her fault. She arrived on a Monday with a leather notebook and good questions and the kind of energy that comes from walking into a role you were actually selected for. I had no problem with Claire. I want to be clear about that. I walk her through everything. The processes I'd built from the first principles up, the relationship map I developed over 4 years of knowing which people and which departments needed what kind of communication and when. The workflows that existed in documentation because I'd written the documentation. The institutional knowledge that lived in my head because I'd been the one present for every decision that created it. She asked good questions, and I answered all of them completely. That's why I was in that building, apparently. The person who answered completely. In her 3rd week, we grabbed lunch in the cafeteria. One of those easy midday conversations that happen when 2 people are in proximity and neither has a reason to avoid the other. She asked me how long I'd been with the company, and I told her 7 years. She said that made sense, that she could tell the team trusted me. Then she said, without any awareness of what she was handing me, that Garrett had mentioned me in her final interview. She said he told her the team had a strong number 2 and that her transition would be seamless because of it. She smiled when she said it, genuinely, like it was a compliment she was passing along. I smiled back. I said something like that was good to hear. I finished my lunch and asked her a question about her afternoon and let the conversation move somewhere else. I went back to my desk. Strong number 2, not almost ready, not developing well, not a future candidate they were invested in. A number 2, a designation, something load-bearing that you didn't promote because promoting it would mean replacing the function it served. Priya had told me in a stairwell what the room sounded like when I wasn't in it. Now, I had the same information from someone who'd been in the room, who'd heard it from Garrett himself, who had no reason to soften it because she didn't know it needed softening. That afternoon, I opened my email and attached my resume to 3 messages I'd been drafting in small increments for the past 10 days. Contacts at other companies. People who knew my work from the outside, which meant they knew it without Garrett's translation layered over it. I hit send on all 3 before 4 o'clock. Within 10 days, I had 2 interviews scheduled. I put them in my personal calendar and told no one in the office. I kept onboarding Claire. I kept answering her questions completely. I kept doing the work at the level I'd always done it because that part was about me and not about them. But I'd stopped asking what I owed the place. I already knew the answer. You don't owe a system anything once you understand that the system has already decided what you are. The offer came on a Thursday. Senior Manager, Strategy and Operations. A team of 6. A title I'd been doing the work of for 4 years without the words to show for it. The salary was a number I'd stopped letting myself think about directly because thinking about it made the gap between what I was worth and what I was being paid too specific to ignore. I read the offer letter twice at my kitchen table that evening, and then closed my laptop and sat there in the quiet and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, which was the particular relief of being accurately seen. I was going to accept. I'd made the decision before I went to bed. In the morning, I'd ask for a meeting with Garrett, and I'd give my notice professionally, and I'd leave the way I'd always planned to leave. Cleanly, on good terms, no grievance aired that didn't need to be. I got into the office the next day, and Garrett was waiting. Not at my desk, not in the hallway, waiting like he'd been watching for me to come through the door. He said he needed 5 minutes and steer me toward one of the small conference rooms before I'd taken my jacket off. He closed the door and sat down and leaned forward with his elbows on the table, which was the posture he used when he wanted you to understand that what he was about to say was real and personal and not a performance. I need to tell you something that isn't public yet, he said. There's a restructure coming, and there's a role being built in it, specifically with you in mind. I've been pushing for this for months. He paused. I need you to trust me for 90 days. I looked at him. He opened his laptop and turned it toward me. A draft org chart. My name in a box 1 level up from where I currently sat. A new function, a broader scope, reporting directly to the VP layer. HR is still finalizing the levels and the comp, he said. But this is real. This is happening. He looked at me steadily. I just need you to not do anything rash before it lands. I sat across from him and looked at the slide with my name on it and felt the full complexity of what it means to want something to be true. I told him I'd think about it. I asked the competitor for a 1-week extension that evening. They gave it to me. That night, I didn't sleep in any useful way. I lay in the dark and ran the same loop, the slide, the org chart, the phrase specifically with you in mind, the fact that Garrett had never once given me a reason to trust him that later proved out. In the morning, I called Priya. I told her everything. The offer, the conference room, the slide, the 90 days. I gave her all of it without editorializing because I needed someone to hear the straight version and tell me what it sounded like from the outside. She listened to all of it without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a second, and then she asked me one question. Have you ever seen a slide from him turn into a real role? I sat with that for a long time. I wanted an answer that would help me. I went back through 4 years of one-on-ones and hallway conversations and kitchen reassurances and lists written in conference rooms with the door closed. I didn't have one. The competitor had given me 1 week. I used 4 days of it. On Thursday evening, I opened my email and accepted the offer. I read the letter one more time, not because I needed to, but because I wanted to feel the full weight of it being real before I signed. Then I signed. I sent it back and closed my laptop and sat in my apartment in the specific quiet of a decision that's finished. I wrote the resignation letter in 15 minutes. Not because I hadn't thought about what to say, but because I'd been thinking about it for so long that there was nothing left to work out. 2 weeks' notice. Gratitude for the opportunities. A clean close. I saved it to my drafts and went to bed and slept better than I had in months. The next morning, I was in Garrett's office at 9. I closed the door behind me. I sat down and I handed him the letter across the desk, and I told him I was resigning. 2 weeks from today. I said it the way you say something you've been carrying for a long time and have finally set down. Not with drama, not with heat, just plainly. His face moved through 3 things in the space of a few seconds. Surprise first, genuine, which told me he believed the conference room had worked. Then something that looked like calculation. Then the version of Garrett that appeared when he needed to recover a situation. He asked what it would take to keep me. And then, for the first time in 4 years, he named a number. An actual number, a salary he could offer, an adjustment he could make. He said he could talk to HR about accelerating the role from the org chart. He said he wanted to make this right. I looked at him across the desk. The time for that conversation, I said, was 4 postings ago. He didn't have an answer for that. He looked at the letter and then back at me, and I could see him deciding whether there was another move available. There wasn't. I spent my last 2 weeks doing something no one asked me to do as thoroughly as I did it. I documented everything. Every process I'd built, every relationship I'd brokered, every workaround I'd developed for the gaps in the system that no one else had bothered to fill. The institutional knowledge that lived in my head because I'd been the one present when it was created. I built it all into a single handover document, organized, annotated, complete. Priya found me at my desk on the second to last day and asked why I was working that hard on the way out. I told her I wanted to leave it better than I found it. She looked at me for a second. They didn't deserve that. No, I said, but it's not about them. I finished the document and sent it to Garrett and spent my last morning saying goodbye to the people who had made 7 years worth showing up for. I picked up my single box, the same one I'd mentally packed a dozen times over the past year, and walked through the lobby and handed him my badge. The building would run without me. For a while. The question was how long before the foundation I'd built and documented and handed over in a clean file started showing the weight of someone no longer being there to hold it. Priya's text had come through 3 weeks earlier. A few lines, no drama. Garrett's team had lost 2 more people since I left. Claire had been quietly interviewing. Priya had heard it from someone who'd seen her LinkedIn activity go from dormant to daily. In a major client account, one I'd personally managed the operational side of for 3 years, was on uncertain ground. Priya ended the text with 3 words, "Thought you'd want to know." I read it, filed it, and went back to the product launch I was 6 weeks from completing. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon. I was at my desk in my office, the one with the window, when my phone lit up with a name I hadn't seen on my screen in 6 months. Garrett. I let it ring once. Then I picked up. He opened warm, asked how I'd been, said I sounded good, mentioned a mutual contact who'd apparently told him I was doing well at the new place. He said he was glad to hear it. He said he'd always known I'd land on my feet. I let him run. Then he made the turn. Clean, practiced, the way he made every turn, like it was just a natural part of the conversation and not the only reason for the call. The role was open again. Things had shifted internally. The team was restructuring, genuinely this time, and my name had come up at the VP level. They were prepared to make it right. A title 1 level above where I'd been. Not the role I'd applied for, but above it. A salary he then named, which was nearly double what I'd been earning when I left. And a sign-on to acknowledge the gap. He said they'd learned some things about what the team needed. He said some things had become clearer in the last few months. He said my name kept coming up, and he thought he owed it to both of us to make the call. I listened to all of it without interrupting once. When he finished, I let a second pass. Then I asked him one question. In 7 years, I said, in 4 interview cycles, did you ever, even once, advocate for me in a room I wasn't in? Silence. Not a brief pause. A pause that ran long enough to be its own answer. Then he started talking. He said I had to understand the politics. That the VP group had been difficult, that headcount decisions above a certain level involved dynamics I wasn't fully seeing from my position. That he'd pushed for me more than I knew. That these things were complicated and he'd always had my best interests in mind, even when the outcomes didn't reflect it. I let him finish. The 4 times weren't a mistake, I said. They were the answer. I just needed longer to hear it. I let that sit for a second. I'm not coming back, Garrett. He started to say something. I hope the restructure goes well, I said. I mean that. And I hung up. I set my phone face down on my desk and looked out the window at nothing in particular for a moment. Not triumphant, not hollow, just finished, in the specific way of something that has been waiting a long time to be finished. Then I turned back to my screen and kept working. 2 days after the call, a message arrived on my professional profile. One of Garrett's VPs, a man named Douglas, I'd presented it twice and eaten lunch near at a conference once. Friendly tone, light on specifics. He said it had been too long, that he'd love to grab coffee sometime. No agenda, just to reconnect with people he respected. I read it once. I wrote back a short, warm note saying I appreciated the message and that things were busy right now, but I wished him well. I didn't suggest a time. I didn't leave a door open. I closed the tab and went back to work. Priya called that Saturday morning. I could tell from her opening that she'd been sitting on something for a few days and had finally decided I should know. She told me that after my no, Garrett had walked into a leadership meeting and framed my decision as personal. That I was unwilling to come back for personal reasons, implying something unresolved on my end, a grudge, an emotional response, the kind of language designed to make a man's clarity look like a wound. I didn't say anything. Two of the senior leaders pushed back, she said. Apparently, they'd seen the handover file, the whole thing, and they knew what was in it, which means they knew what you'd built and what it had been running on. She paused. One of them tried to reach you directly. Last week, through a back channel. I thought about the message I'd seen come in from a name I half recognized and had quietly left unanswered. I saw it, I said. You didn't reply. No, I said. She was quiet for a second. They're saying your name right now in rooms you're not in, differently than before. I sat with that. The same rooms, the same VP layer, the same building I'd spent 7 years being told I was almost ready for. Say my name now with the specific attention that comes from absence, from a handover file that documented what the place had been standing on, from a client account going soft, and 2 more departures, and a number 2 who was quietly updating her profile. I told Priya I appreciated her telling me. A week after that, a recruiter reached out. Referred, she said, by someone who'd worked with me. She pitched a role at a third company, strong, well-matched, the kind of call that 6 months ago would have felt like a lifeline. I took the call. I listened to all of it. I told her I was happy where I was, that the role sounded interesting for the right person, and that I appreciated the introduction. I meant all of it. After we hung up, I opened a message to Priya and wrote 3 sentences. That I just turned down another one. That things were good. That I was glad she'd been the person in that building willing to say things out loud. Her reply came back in a few minutes. You should have left after the second one. I read it and laughed, which was the only honest response. She wasn't wrong. The second one, I'd still had enough reasons to stay. The third one, I'd manufactured them. The fourth one, I'd let Garrett hand me a list and convince myself that this time the list meant something. What do you do with the version of yourself that stayed too long? You don't argue with him. You don't pretend those years were wasted when they built the thing that made the exit possible. But you don't protect him either. You just make sure he only exists in the past tense. A year out, I was leading a team of 9. 2 of them I'd hired myself. Not inherited, not assigned, actually selected. I knew what I was looking for because I'd spent years being evaluated by someone who didn't know how to see it. And that turns out to be a thorough education in what good assessment actually requires. We did one-on-ones every 2 weeks. Real ones with notes and follow-through. I told each of them specifically what I'd seen them do well. Not generally, not as encouragement, but as documentation of something real I'd observed. And I told them what I needed them to grow into with the same specificity. One of them, about 6 months in, asked me about a stretch role that was opening on an adjacent team. She'd heard about it and wanted to know if she was ready. I told her the truth, where she was strong, where the gap was, what she'd need to demonstrate over the next quarter to be a credible candidate, and that if she did those things, I would advocate for her directly. She wrote it down. I recognized the gesture. I made sure the list meant something. Priya joined the company on a Thursday in early spring. Different team, different floor, same building. I heard she'd accepted the offer before it was announced, and I left a short message saying I'd buy the first coffee. We sat across from each other in a lobby cafe on her first morning and talked the way people talk when they've been through something together and are now on the other side of it. At some point she mentioned, without making a moment of it, that the old team had been restructured twice since I left, and that Garrett was no longer the director. I nodded. How's the commute from the new place? I asked. She looked at me for a second and then smiled. 20 minutes. It's fine. We talked about our onboarding The people she'd met, whether the coffee in the building was as bad as it looked. We didn't go back to the old building. There was nothing there that needed us. On a quiet evening a few weeks later, I was the last one on my floor. I was closing things down for the night when I went through my saved voicemails out of habit, the ones I'd been meaning to clear for months. Garrett's was still there. I'd saved it the morning after he called. I'd listened to it once in the car, which was enough to know what it was: his voice, his pitch, a version of the conference room slide delivered into a phone. I'd never deleted it, and I'd never listened to it a second time. I pressed delete. No hesitation, no ceremony. Just a piece of audio that had stopped being relevant, removed. I turned off the desk lamp and picked up my bag and locked the office door. Walking to the elevator, I thought about the 4 times. The postings, the loops, the kitchens and conference rooms, and lists written down in good faith. The hand on the shoulder. The sentence delivered in 4 variations across 4 years. They didn't feel like a wound anymore. They felt like a map. One I needed badly for a long time and had read so many times I had it memorized and could finally put down because I already knew where I was going. For 4 years, I waited for someone to tell me I was ready. The 5th time I stopped waiting, I found out I'd been ready since before anyone bothered to ask. I'm over it where silence ends. If you've ever stayed somewhere longer than you should have, what finally made the cost undeniable?